Last year, after a blissful first year of living in a new apartment, all on my own for the first time, a man moved in next door that I will never forget. The layout of the apartment is crucial to understanding this incident, so I made a little diagram. Floor plan taken from the closest thing I could find online and edited. The most important part is that my balcony and his balcony are only partially separated by a wall, and there is a solid 2-foot gap in which you can easily walk from one to the other. For context, I previously had a very lonely woman living next door for the entire first year I lived there who never crossed this balcony threshold without being explicitly invited. I only throw this in there so you can understand I wasn't previously concerned about someone infiltrating my space. The first time I met this new neighbor, he was unloading groceries from his massive truck into the assigned parking spot next to mine. As I was driving up, he and a girl I assumed to be his girlfriend were unloading boxes from Costco. I noticed them speaking, and as soon as I was out of the car, they went silent. I nodded to them, proceeded to the elevator, and the guy ran up behind me, threw some boxes down, and begged me to wait. No problem, I'm a good neighbor. While in the elevator, the girlfriend refused to make eye contact or speak to me. A little weird, but I just thought she was shy, but he quickly introduced himself and was extremely chatty. In the 45 seconds it takes to get to the floor where our apartments are, he asked how I liked the place, where I was from, and where I worked. Looking back, his enthusiasm was a little strange, but I chalked it up to him being excited to be in a new place. For the sake of the rest of the story, we'll call him Sam. Sam was maybe 33, 6 foot tall, with a slim muscular build and had hair buzzed extremely short as if to mask his balding. Pretty average looking by all accounts. The first few weeks we run into each other often, and he always makes small talk and always refers to me as Miss. I assume it's because he forgot my name but wanted to be polite. I almost never see his girlfriend after the first night, but occasionally I can hear him talking to a lady in his apartment as the walls are reasonably thin. One night, about 3 months after Sam moved in, my boyfriend is spending the night and we were watching movies on the couch. It's maybe 11:30 p.m. The back of the couch is against the wall I share with Sam, and we hear some banging noises. My first thought is that him and his girlfriend must be getting it on. Boyfriend and I laugh and turn the volume up a bit to drown them out. Then, in addition to the banging, the neighbors begin to scream. We can hear objects being thrown, glass shattering. The words are muffled, but there is distinctively anger and crying going on. My boyfriend, gem that he is, steps onto the semi-shared balcony and, in his loudest voice, yells over, without crossing onto Sam's balcony, "Everything okay in there?" The girl opens the sliding door on Sam's side a minute or two later and says, "Sorry about that." So, we leave it alone. I'm concerned, but we have no idea what actually happened and decide to go to bed. Big mistake, I know. I wake up around 3 a.m. to more screaming, but my boyfriend refuses to wake up, and I'm not about to take my 5-foot self to break up whatever is going on at 3 a.m. I considered calling the police, but was so drowsy I convinced myself I dreamed it. I deeply regret that decision. The next morning I woke up to some terrible personal news. An entirely unrelated death of a friend, and pretty much put the events of that night on the back burner. I didn't forget, but it also wasn't on my mind. Fast forward about 2 weeks. It's a warm day, and I'm outside reading a book in a robe, bra, and shorts. I'm in a chair that faces away from Sam's apartment, so I can't see his side from where I am. I'm deep in my book when suddenly I get tapped on the shoulder. Sam is standing behind me and asks if we can talk for a second. This man has already crossed an, albeit invisible, line by coming on my side of the balcony, but I also can't get to my door without physically moving him aside, so I ask him what's going on. He told me it was his birthday, and asked if I knew where to get some Mary Jane because I seem like a girl who knows how to have a good time. As we live in a state where that stuff is legal, I told him that I'm sure Google would provide the best dispensary in the area, but I personally didn't have any. He proceeds to tell me how drunk he got last night, and at this point I am itching for an exit. As I start to move, as if to signal I'm done talking, he reaches out for my shoulder and tells me he hit and scratched my car last night because he was driving very, very wasted. Remember his massive truck? He says all of this with a smile on his face, almost laughing. I'm surprised, but mostly want to get away from him because my creep senses are starting to tingle, and I don't want to blow up at him for hitting my car. He says he'll send me his insurance info if I give him my number, and thankfully I knew that would be a bad call. I make a bad, nervous joke about knowing where he lived and said if the damage was bad enough, I would knock on his door to get his insurance. He counters by saying he will leave a note with his info on my door. He retreats from my balcony while also saying he'd prefer to just pay me cash and not involve insurance. I give it an hour or so, and then I head down to assess the damage. I did this because I didn't want to walk down at the same time as him and risk having him follow me. Sure enough, there are 2 long new scratches on the driver's door. They're not deep, just kind of superficial or worthy of a call to insurance immediately. I really just didn't want to get involved with him in any way, so I decided I could deal with the scratches, but this little event has kind of shaken me. At this point, I knew something was off with him. Nothing unusual happens as far as I'm aware this night. The next day is Saturday, and as I had to work the next day, I'm home alone, watching some action-y movie, and it's around 11 p.m. I'm on the sofa with my cat curled up on me, and the movie is relatively loud, so it takes me a little while to register this banging noise coming from the hallway of my apartment building. I honestly only noticed because my cat had woken up and got all puffed up and freaked out. I turn down the volume of the film, and suddenly the banging is getting louder and louder, and just as I stand up, I hear the 5 words no one wants to hear coming from their door. "Open up! It's the police!" My stomach dropped to the floor. I had lied to Sam the day before. I totally did have some ganja on me, and I had smoked a joint outside on the balcony, the part farthest away from Sam's, maybe 20 minutes before. I'm totally panicked, high as a kite, and trying to control my breathing so I don't immediately come off as suspicious before I answer the door. I remember checking the peephole to see a close-up of a cop's face, and then opening the door, coming face to face with 6 officers, all with guns drawn. I'm about 0.5 seconds away from completely peeing my pants in fear, still convinced I'm somehow in trouble for smoking a joint. The officer, who seems to be in charge, can sense instantly the level of panic, and he says, "Ma'am, you're not in trouble. We need to speak with you about your neighbor. Can we come in?" At this point, I'm reeling, and my whole being is tense. I let the cops in, but my heart hasn't moved from my throat. The policeman in charge asks me about any interactions with Sam. I tell them I barely know him, that he just lives next door, only moved in a few months ago. I ask why they needed to be in my apartment. I'm scared, but also I don't typically get along with cops, and I have the right to know why 6 of them practically waved their guns in my face. The lead officer proceeds to tell me that Sam is a bad guy. He apparently beat his girlfriend so badly the night prior that she is now in the ICU for her injuries. They also told me Sam had a gun and had barricaded himself in the apartment next to mine. They said they had spoken to my building manager and knew my place had access to his balcony and they needed to use it. Then they asked me to go into the bedroom and lock the doors and turn the lights off. The next 30 to 45 minutes was complete torture. In my panic, I left my cell phone on my kitchen counter and had to sit in my room just listening to the commotion. No shots were ever fired, but there was a lot of yelling and what sounded like things being thrown. Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime, the main officer knocked on my door and told me that Sam had been arrested and thanked me for letting them use my apartment. They asked me questions for maybe 15 more minutes and left. I wish this is where the story ended, but there's a bit more. In the days following Sam's arrest, I became even more panicked about him coming back to the apartment building, worried about retaliation. I hadn't said anything to the police to technically incriminate him. I had proof of nothing except his word that he was the one who scratched my car, but I did tell them about the night my boyfriend and I heard them fight. About 5 days later, Sam reappeared at the building as I was coming home from work one evening. He tried to approach me, but the elevator shut just as he was running to catch it. My whole body got tense, like the feeling when you come this close to getting in a car accident but narrowly avoiding it. I stayed off my balcony entirely from this point and always kept the curtains closed. We didn't speak or really see each other at all for another few weeks and then had our final interaction. Sam stopped me in the parking lot one night, running after me as I was about to get on the elevator. He begged me to tell him why I let the cops in that night. I told him the honest truth, that I was stoned, didn't know what to do, and had a bad history with cops. This is all true, and again, I was concerned about him trying to retaliate. He then got pretty upset and kept trying to repeat the question, obviously wanting a different answer. When I couldn't give him one, he then offered me $3,000 to testify as a character witness on his behalf because I knew him and knew how he really treated women. I was speechless and very freaked out. He told me his hearing was the next Thursday morning and he asked if I could show up. I was like a deer frozen in headlights for a moment and then somehow got out of there after mumbling a string of words that were most likely incoherent. The Wednesday night before this trial, I came home from work and my cat was acting kind of weird, like something had just spooked her and her tail was all puffed out. I kind of shook it off, but I noticed through the curtains that there was something taped to the outside of my sliding glass door. Apparently Sam had left a post-it with his phone number and name and underneath, "I'm counting on you." Needless to say, I never showed up. I took a photo of the post-it, grabbed my cat, locked all of my doors, and stayed at my mom's house for about 5 days after that happened. I did phone the police to let them know that he had been on my balcony again, but they never followed up with anything. Eventually, my boyfriend came and went back to my place together. Everything was as it should have been. I never saw Sam again, but a few weeks later, a lady that I'd never seen before was cleaning out his apartment. Maybe a month after that, new people moved in, and things have been normal ever since. I tried calling the police in the county jail to see if he was in lockup again, but no one was able to release information to me. I'm hoping that means he's there, if he did what the police said he did. So to Sam, I will say I'm not really sure what happened, but my biggest regret is not calling the police when I felt like I should have in my gut, and I hope to God I never see you when you get out. When I was around 6, my parents divorced and my dad was soon given full custody as my mom was an alcoholic and had racked up a few DUIs and such. Anyway, me, my younger sister, and my dad moved to a new neighborhood and we transferred to the nearby elementary school. The school was pretty close to my new house, maybe 5 to 7 or so blocks away, close enough to walk, but my sister and I, also a girl, were too young to walk alone. Sometimes our dad would walk us to school in the morning and then walk back, and less commonly, he'd walk to pick us up. Most of the time he picked us up in his black Mazda. The way pickups worked at my school was pretty common. We went out with our class, stood by our teacher and classmates, and when a car pulled up, designated staff members would ask who the student was that they were picking up and then go find them from their class and escort them to the car. Seeing as my mom was in jail at this time, the only person who ever picked me up was my dad. One day, I was in 3rd grade and my sister was in 1st. We were outside waiting to be picked up. After being outside for only a few minutes, my little sister came over to me and said someone who wasn't our dad was in a car to pick us up and said both of our names and they'd found her first. She said he'd smiled at her and told her our dad had told him to pick us up that afternoon, but she said she wanted to find me first before she got in the car since she didn't recognize him, and thank God she did that. Our dad had always told us not to talk to strangers, so I grabbed my teacher and told her what had happened. She got really alarmed, this scared look on her face, and told us to stay where we were while she told another teacher or something. Our dad arrived to pick us up a few minutes later and we got home safely. We told him about it and we all had a long talk about safety protocol. He asked my sister to describe the man and the car, and he called the police and gave them the best description he could, although my sister was very young and wasn't very focused on important details like that. A few weeks later it happened again, but this time he said my name. My dad had given the school the same info he'd given the police, but presumably he had multiple vehicles because my sister said he'd been in a red car and this one was black, similar to my dad's. I saw the black car and ran up to it, but luckily I caught a glimpse of the face before I opened the door and hopped in. He was a middle-aged man, really pale, with a really angular face. We made eye contact and his mouth was smiling, but his eyes looked really wrong to me, squinty and almost angry. I turned back towards the carpool assistant who delivered me to the car to alert her, but by the time I did, the car was gone, and I couldn't give many details. My dad contacted the police again, but without a license plate, they weren't able to do much. The last time I saw him was until months later, near the end of elementary school. I was walking home with a big group of kids that lived in my neighborhood, and he drove by us and slowed the car down to try and talk to us. I recognized his face immediately and alerted the other kids to run. Luckily, we were only about 3 houses down from where one of my friends lived, and we all piled into her house, concerning her parents significantly as we explained the situation. I never saw him again after that. My dad started dating my now stepmom, and we moved to her neighborhood and switched schools shortly after. I still think about him occasionally, though. His face was actually in my dream a few nights ago, which reminded me to write down my experience. To this day, I'm in my 20s now. I don't know how he knew our names, how he knew anything about us, really. Very scary to think about what would have happened to my tiny little sister if she'd gotten in the car with that man, and what might have happened to me if I had. This happened about a year ago. There were so many terrible factors working against me that night, I'm astounded I got away unscathed, at least physically. This all begins when I'm in my friend's apartment, who lives in a really rough part of town. In a series of poor decisions, that night I decided to get belligerently drunk and take a few pills of God knows what. I know. Safe to say, after a solid night of partying, around 4 a.m. I was not in the right state of mind. My drug-addled brain decides that instead of staying the night at my friend's apartment like I normally would, I wanted to Uber back to my own apartment. My friend's apartment had 2 separate entrances and exits to the building, one in the back, unlit, parking lot of the building, and one facing the street. They had 2 sets of keys for each door, and I only had keys to the one in the back of the apartment. Since my Uber would obviously arrive at the street and the door in the front of the building locked itself behind you, I exited this way when the driver was soon to arrive. Looking back, standing outside that apartment, I realize I look like the easiest target on the planet. I'm a small petite female in my early 20s and I can hardly stay upright. I'm using a street lamp to prop myself up and not doing a good job at either. The light was basically a beacon for any nearby predators saying, "Come get me." I'm not paying attention to my surroundings at all in this state, despite the fact that there are literally a bullet hole in the front door I just came out of. Not good. I remember checking to see what car I was getting picked up in and was only able to pick out the fact that it was a black sedan. Soon after stepping outside, a black sedan pulls up to the curb and starts rolling down the windows, so I step forward. Before this man even spoke, I could feel something was wrong. He had an expression like he was tearing me apart with just his eyes. After seeing that look, it gave me a new meaning to the word predator to describe a criminal, because I then knew what it felt like to be prey. He basically barks at me. "I'm your Uber driver." This was the second red flag that somehow made its way through my brain. Normally, Uber drivers just roll down the window and say, "Your name," or any version of that, but always include your name. I think I just stared at him for a second, my brain slowly piecing together the situation I was potentially in, and I asked him, "What's my name?" He immediately is enraged and starts screaming about how he doesn't have freaking time for this and just get in the effing car, etc., etc. I don't think I've ever been sobered up so fast in my life. I'm completely panicking. Obviously, this wasn't my Uber. Quickly checking the license plate, I immediately see it's not a match. Meanwhile, this guy is still screaming at me and I have absolutely no idea what to do. If I bolt in either direction, this guy could easily outrun me or even have a weapon. I'm also pretty sure at this point that if he's trying to nab a random girl off the street, he must have a weapon of some sort. I can't run back into the apartment door right behind me since it locks behind you and I don't have the keys, nor the time to unlock it. Running towards the back door would do nothing as well, and as he's idling right by the mouth of the driveway towards the back parking lot, and again, I would have to take time to find the right keys and get in. If I screamed, I'm not exactly in the type of neighborhood where someone would try to be a vigilante, and I can still hear the music radiating from my friend's third-floor apartment. I knew they wouldn't hear me. It's also 4 a.m. and absolutely no one is around. People talk a lot on this sub how they either sprint into action or freeze, but I felt incapable of doing either. It was the absolute worst feeling I'd ever felt in my life. Everything in me wanted to run, but I felt that if I did, it would be the end of me. But if I kept standing there, staring in shock at the screaming man, the result would be the same. From when he started screaming at me to this point, I'm guessing only 20 seconds had passed. Just as he's looking like he's getting ready to get out of the car, another black sedan pulls up right behind him. Checking the license plate as quickly as I can, I realize it's my actual Uber, and make a full sprint to the car, really only like 6 steps, and throw myself in, screaming at my real Uber driver, "What's my name?" The poor dude looks terrified, but responds with my name quickly, to which I reply, "Get me out of here. That man's trying to kidnap me." If I was in this Uber driver's position, I think I would be too shocked to react as quickly as he did, but my dude flew out of there, offered to call the cops for me, which I declined and now regret, and then walked me to the front door of my apartment, ensuring I got inside safely. Truly an incredible human being. You can rest easy knowing he got the fastest tip my college student bank account would allow for, although he deserved much, much more. So when I was in high school, it was my senior year. I was 5'3", about 95 pounds. I was at the park down the street from my house waiting for the school bus. Usually my boyfriend, who was already graduated, would drive me to school, but he was busy. I later found out that he was cheating. Well, there was usually a few of us girls there waiting, but this day I was the only one. So I sat at a bench and had one headphone in and one out so I could listen to my surroundings. I've always been cautious of what's going on around me. As I waited, a black Honda pulled up and I immediately noticed it. I kept an eye on it because I had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't making it obvious that I was watching it because I didn't want to look crazy, but after a few minutes, 2 big men got out. I immediately texted my boyfriend that I was at the park and these guys were creeping me out. Of course he didn't text back, so I copy-pasted the same text to my cousin, who was home. I live with my aunt and 2 guy cousins, unwinding down from the night shift. I wanted someone to know the car make and color, plus it was 2 men, and didn't get any responses. When they got out of the car, they started to walk towards me, so I got up from the bench and walked towards the street because the bus was supposed to be there any minute. The driver actually ended up being a little late. As I stood by the street, these men walked up to me and I could feel the bad energy. One guy said hello as the others stood there staring me down. I just did a small smile and a nod, then looked away. Then the same guy, I'll call him number 1, asked how old I was. I didn't respond. I could tell the other guy, number 2, was getting mad that I wasn't feeding into it. Then number 1 kept asking me yes or no questions like, do you have a boyfriend? Do you live close? Do you do drugs? We have some. Do you want some? And then number 2 asked me if I knew what the black market was. I felt a cold rush go over my body and I got the chills. Number 2, who was quiet the whole time, started to tell me how they just got back from Russia, but the way he said it was so scary, also intimidating. I knew they were from somewhere else because they had a strong accent, but I couldn't pinpoint the place. They kept telling me to go to their car because they have drugs. I said no thank you. Trust me, I wasn't a straight edge in high school, but I wasn't stupid either. I would never get into somebody's car that I didn't know. Then number 1 asked if I had a car. I said no and that my bus is almost here. Sorry, I have to go. And by some sort of miracle, the bus rounded the corner and the guys backed off. They had been inching closer and closer as they asked me questions, but before the bus got to me, number 1 handed me a card and said that he has a car shop and to call him sometime if I ever need anything. He even stated that he'd give me a free car. The card looked shifty, and I didn't want to grab it, but I knew I needed that number on it to report it. So I took it, and they walked off super fast. Finally, the bus stopped and picked me up. As soon as I got on, I started to cry. I had a complete meltdown. It was like all the adrenaline was keeping my mind and body aware and focused while the men were there, but as soon as I was safe, my body and mind gave out. Thankfully, there weren't many people on the bus, so the driver calmed me down before we took off, and I explained to her what had happened. When she looked around for the car, they were gone. She said she saw them around me, but thought I knew them because they were so close to my person. The driver called into her dispatch saying that there was an incident so that they could notify the school. She continued to pick all the other students up, but when we got to the school, she walked me into the office. I was absolutely terrified to be alone. The principal came out, and so did campus security. They were so sweet and gentle with me as they brought me back to the principal's office. Both were men, and they proceeded to ask me questions about the men, their car, and the questions the creeps had asked me. I cried the whole time. Then I pulled out the card that they gave me and handed it to the principal. He looked at the security and said that he was going to call it and act like my dad, so we did. He was on speaker, and the number 1 guy actually answered. I knew his voice as if though it were burned into my brain. It took everything in me not to have a panic attack. The principal asked the guy if he could get him a car at a good price, and the guy played dumb. The principal said his daughter, me, gave him the card. As soon as he said that, the guy hung up. They tried calling again, and the phone was shut off. They eventually disconnected. I could see a shift in the principal and security as soon as the phone clicked. The security got on his phone and called the police and had them come to the school. It was as if they finally knew it was real, like my crazy story wasn't made up. The principal excused himself and the security guard, and they talked for a minute in the hall. I could hear everything they were saying. She's lucky to be alive. This is serious. We need to call her parents to come get her. When the police got there, they came into the office that I was sitting in and asked me for the story again and in front of the principal and security guard. I feel like they wanted to see if I was being 100% honest, so I obliged. The officers were straight up with me and told me it sounded like they were watching us girls at that park because they chose the one day that one of us were alone. He also said the card was being used as bait to get me to go where they wanted. I felt sick. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The school called my aunt, but she didn't pick up. The only person that picked up first was my boyfriend. One of the officers talked to him as the other finally got a hold of my aunt. My boyfriend ended up picking me up and taking me home, and I cried the whole time. When I got there, my grandma, uncle, aunt, mom, and cousins were all out front. The women were all in tears, and the men were livid but worried for me. A week later, some girl at another local high school, not far from the park, was saved by other students. She was being dragged into a black Honda by 2 guys. The other kids stood up and grabbed her and pulled her out of the car. The principal called me into his office, and that's how I found out. They also had the same officers there and had me choose the 2 guys out of a picture lineup. I pointed them out fast. They were caught. It was in fact those 2 guys that tried grabbing the girl, a freshman girl. I felt worried for her and sad that she went through worse than I did, and I felt almost free again. Still scared, but not looking over my shoulders as often, and I couldn't believe that they were caught. After that, my family teamed up to drive me to school for the rest of the year. My boyfriend, now ex, also took me some days. I'm thankful to be alive and well, and I'm even more thankful that the girl was also saved by the courageous kids at her high school. For a bit of backstory, relevant to why I didn't freak out sooner, I live in a big city which is mostly a friendly place, but like all cities, it has its rough areas. There are 2 main spots that are known to be particularly rough, and for the first 14 years of my life, I lived in one of these areas. So though it can naturally be a bit uncomfortable, I tend to be pretty unbothered by drunks, addicts, creeps talking to me on the street. Anyway, I moved from one rough area and moved to a safer one, but it's very near to the other, arguably worse rough area. I know both of these areas pretty well too, which helped with what happened 5 months ago. So I had some stuff going on in my personal life and got through phases of bad anxiety as it is. I had to make the decision to take some time off of work, but wanted to try and stay in a routine and be productive. What do productive people do? They go to the dentist way past when they should have. So I made my appointment, and when it rolled around, I walked there. My dentist is in the rough area that I now live close to. On my route home, I have to walk past a pub on a main road which has a super bad reputation. Anything you can think of, it's happened inside or just outside of this pub. Stabbings, shootings, drug raids, the lot. How it's still allowed to run, I have no idea. Anyway, I noticed someone sat at the bench outside the pub. I have my headphones in, but see him saying something, so I assume he's asking me for a lighter or something, and I take out an earplug. He asked me if I want to join him for a drink. This was around 11:30 a.m., by the way. I just slightly laughed and said no thanks. Now, as soon as I got a few steps away, I had this bad feeling like something was just not right, but as mentioned, I was going through a phase of bad anxiety, so I chalked it up to being that. After about 2 minutes, I go to turn left and see the man walking in my direction in the corner of my eye. I told myself it was nothing, but took my headphones out anyway just in case, as I was about to walk through a narrow road that leads to a car park and is always very empty. All of a sudden, I hear him shouting at me, "Hey miss, I want to talk to you, wait." The usual stuff. He catches up to me and tells me, "I'm not a creep, but you're too beautiful to let go." I try and stay polite, but also make it clear I'm not interested. I have no idea why, but seem to have lost the ability to lie, so when he asked if I was single, I said yes. When he asked what I was doing that night, a Friday, I said I had no plans. I 100% know I should have lied, and as the truth came out, I was really annoyed with myself, but hey, ho. He seemed to get the message, and I say I really have to go, so I carry on walking, thinking that's the end of it. So I make my way across the big car park. Also worth noting here that I can only go 2 ways, where I'm heading or back the way I came. At the end of the car park is a cycle pedestrian lane that has a massive wall on one side with 2 lots of steps that lead to a car park to a retail park, and bushes on the other end is super narrow. I get into the lane and hear footsteps like someone is running, probably a jogger. I'm being paranoid, and till right behind me I hear, "At least give me your number." I finally start to panic and realize actually it's not my anxiety, and this is incredibly shady. I give him a number but change the last digit, and this guy proceeds to attempt to drop call me. Clearly my phone doesn't ring, and he then starts getting annoyed, saying I need to give him the right number. I apologize. He then has his hand basically on my phone, stood way too close to me, and orders me to type his number in and drop call him. Awesome. Creep now has my number. Still not enough for him, I reiterate that I'm on my way somewhere and seriously need to get going. What happened next is honestly a blur, and I must have had a massive adrenaline rush. He had something, but I can't remember what. I think I sort of blacked out, and then he grabbed me by the elbow. Next thing I knew, I was at the top of one of the sets of steps that led to a much busier and open space. I had obviously panicked, yanked my arm free, and legged it. Pretty impressive how fast I got on all those steps, considering I haven't been in the gym in months. Luckily, one of my friends works in one of the stores in the retail park, so I walked over to it, practically looking over my shoulder the whole time. I find my friend visibly shaking, can barely speak. She asks if I'm okay, and I just burst into tears. I gather my thoughts and say what just happened and try to downplay it, saying that I'm just being dramatic. He's been calling my number this whole time. She takes my phone and notes his number and then blocks him. She takes me to the staff room and convinced me to file a police report, which I do. Unfortunately, though, I found out street harassment is not actually illegal where I live. But because he made physical contact, it might not be a complete lost cause. Police tell me they will be in touch. Now fast forward until around 2 weeks ago, my mom's friend who knew about what had happened sent her an article and asked her to show me. I genuinely couldn't believe my eyes. It was about a man who had followed a girl and then assaulted her in the same rough area. At the end of the article, it's a picture, and it's him. I haven't heard anything from the police, and since he had already been charged, I figured there wasn't any need for me to contact them again. I wish that they had taken what I said more seriously, though, as I specifically remember my friend saying someone younger or less used to that behavior might not have got away or ran, which was what convinced me to file the report in the first place. My heart goes out to the girl, and although currently in jail, I really hope neither of us have to face him again. His charge was pretty serious, so he'll be there for a long time, thankfully. I met my first serious boyfriend when I was 15 in secondary school in 2005. We ended up being together for about 2.5 years. We were in the same area, myself being only 3 months older than him. We clicked with each other's friend groups, so everyone tended to hang out with no issues. A few months into the relationship, some small red flags started to appear. Another guy tried talking to me, to which my boyfriend threatened him, and this landed him in detention as it happened in school time. This was the first of many times I saw a very scary side of him. Other occurrences that were massive, but in hindsight they really were, was him smashing his bedroom window because I didn't want to go and get drunk one night, him throwing drinks over me, and when he started to rear his ugly side even more, he pinned me against a wall because one of his friends sat next to me on a sofa at a party. Thankfully, his friends pulled him off of me and gave him a bit of a talking to, but it was put down to just too much drink and forgotten about. So time goes by and we briefly split up because he was taking a lot of drugs, mainly ecstasy and speed. I didn't really want to be doing all of that, meaning we spent a lot less free time together, so I called it a day. We were apart for about a month before getting back together, in which time I had been casually chatting with someone else, which didn't really go anywhere. One morning when we were still in bed, he had a text from a local friend and went to meet them, leaving me in bed at his house. His mom, stepdad, and sister were out. So after about 5 minutes, I got up and went to use the bathroom when I heard his car screech to a halt outside. I could hear his front door fling open and smash the wall and him pounding up the stairs. I could hear him breathing very heavily, like he was almost growling. The bathroom door was locked. It was wooden, so it didn't take him much time to smash it through. He screamed at me about how I had been talking to someone whilst we were split up, and how could I, despite the fact that he was hooking up with someone else in his friend circle. I explained it was only texting and that we were split up, but that fell on deaf ears. He went on to rip my vest top strap and rip my boots, Ugg boot type things that went up to the knee, and then told me to get out and walk home, which was about 5 miles. I live in the UK in a very quiet area. There tends to be a small village, then like a mile stretch of quiet road, then another village, then a mile stretch of road, and so on. So I'm walking back on the first part of the quiet road with my top hanging off of me and my boots flapping all over the place as they've been ripped when I hear his car. He is a Saxo VTR with a telltale loud exhaust. There was no way I was dealing with him again, so I jumped over a hedge and hid. I remember getting scratched up from the brambles, but I didn't care. I just crouched behind this hedge, hoping that he'd just disappear. I'd heard his car drive up and down that road a few times before he gave in and figured it was safe. I ignored all of his calls and luckily made it home safe running most of the way. I received messages from him apologizing and telling me how he'd end his own life, but I just didn't care at that point. After some time, he finally left me alone, and I just concentrated on college and spending time with my friends. I really wish that was the end of my interactions with him, but it wasn't. I was on a night out in my local town with friends. I had put my ex to the back of my mind, as it had been months now without hearing anything or seeing him. There I was minding my own business, dancing away, when he just appears out of nowhere. He tries to talk to me, which I acknowledge, but really am not in the mood for it, so I go to the toilet near the exit and decide how to handle this. One of my friends was working at the local Asta that night, and I knew that they'd finish in about an hour, so I decided that I'd leave the club and walk to the Asta and wait for them to get off. I knew it'd only take about 15 to 20 minutes to get there. In hindsight, that was the stupidest idea, but I just wanted to get away from him. I peer out of the toilet, and although it's busy, I can't see him. So far, so good. I quickly run to the cloakroom and hand him my ticket to get my coat back, shove it on, and get out the door. There were people outside smoking and just hovering about chatting. I glanced around as I walked through and didn't see him, so figured it was fine for me to dash off. About 10 minutes into my walk, I start to feel uneasy. I don't know why, I'm just full of dread. I turn around, and about 30 feet behind me is my ex. Following me, eyes locked on me, not saying a word. He looks evil. He must have been waiting for me to come out of the toilets or clocked me getting my coat and kept a distance behind me the whole time. So it's past 12 a.m. The roads are dead because of the time. There's no nearby houses. I realize in this moment just how badly I messed up. I text my friend quickly, telling her what's happening, where I am, where I'm going to. She tries to call, but I cancel it as I don't want him knowing I've alerted people to whatever the situation is going to turn into. I pick up the pace and can hear that he does too. Ahead of me, like out of a horror movie, is the underground pass. It's a walkway that goes under the main road and brings you out into the Asda car park. I had to either run through this 100-yard, dimly lit tunnel or turn around and face him. I decided screw it, and sprinted through the tunnel. After all, Asda was open on the other side. There would be for sure someone in the car park. They had a 24-hour petrol station and a gas point, etc., which many people do use. So I bolted through, and this is when he starts shouting abuses at me. You effing this, you effing that, the usual. I get through the tunnel, and I'm so relieved to finally see Asda all lit up, knowing that people were inside. I notice a youngish guy on a moped not too far off from the entrance. I let my guard down, figuring that I'd be left alone now someone else is visible, but I was wrong. So very wrong. The next thing I know, I'm being grabbed by my hair. He takes my phone out of my hand and smashes it on the floor. I start shouting, and the moped guy sees us and legs it into the store. Great. So Crazy X here starts pulling me backwards towards the underpass, and I start noping and panicking real hard. If he gets me in that underpass, I'm screwed. So with all my might, I swing up and punch him as hard as I could in the face. It was then I remembered he still had a hold of my hair as he ripped a clump of it out. He grabs me again, picking me up by the throat only to throw me to the floor, cutting my knees and hand. He's now screaming at me, calling me all sorts of expletives for hitting him. At this point, I start to hear shouting, and to my relief, it's getting closer. The guy on the moped has alerted staff to the situation outside, and a variety of people were running out towards us, a security guard, staff member, and even a customer. My ex started to run, but was caught. The staff at Asda had rang the police, who were on their way. I saw my friend and just collapsed into her arms like a baby. The police were there in about 5 minutes. They arrested him and took me to the station to make a statement. They had to take photos of all my injuries, all inflicted by someone I once loved. Bruises, grazes, cuts, a patch of missing hair. I felt embarrassed and ashamed. I remember the police officer trying to lighten the mood by joking about me managing to punch him at least. What happened after was just all a blur. I shut myself away and developed bad anxiety and panic attacks due to everything that happened. I remember an officer visiting me telling me about a court date. I didn't attend. In hindsight, I should have, but I couldn't face him in those evil eyes. I didn't want to remember the fear I felt looking at him. I just wanted it all to go away. It was in the local paper that week, details of his court date, etc. I was told that he had been in an anger management program and had started counseling. He was forced to face what he was, which I'm glad of, as he was a monster. I've been doing my 1 hour of outdoor exercises at night because I find it most relaxing. My neighborhood is very quiet, and I'm lucky to live in a nice area which I've always considered super safe. I used to walk at night even before lockdown because I live right next to a canal, so there are lots of nice paths that are super pretty at night when everything is all lit up by the moon. Anyway, I was walking last night and decided to go to the shop first because I was hungry and then detour back to my usual route along the canal. When I was walking, I heard 2 guys speaking super loudly in German. I live in England, so it was a bit unusual, but Not anything I thought twice about. They looked around 30, pretty tall, and they had caps on, which I remember because they had matching designs, which I thought was funny. They started getting really close, and when I glanced back to look at them, they started jeering, so I knew they were looking at me, which kind of freaked me out, so I sped walked towards the shop but had to stop at the road. I wasn't planning on getting hit by a car. They caught up with me but didn't stop for the lights to change, just walking across and went into the store I was headed for, so I shrugged off my hunger and decided just to go to the canal for my walk. I stopped thinking about the men soon after, chalking it up to me being a generally anxious person. I don't particularly like walking past strangers at night, and I'm self-conscious enough as it is without them talking to me or about me. Anyway, I complete my walk and I'm headed back home. For the story to make sense, I need to describe where I was stood. On my right, there is the water itself. I'm stood on the path, and to my left, there is a big drop that goes straight onto the main road, and next to that road, there is a row of houses. There is a railway bridge in front of me. I have my earphones in, and my music is pretty loud, but I think I hear someone shouting, so I take one earphone out and listen, but it's pretty silent apart from passing cars on the road below me. That's when I see two men heading towards the bridge, and I immediately recognize them as the two guys who had jeered at me before from their caps. I stopped walking as my anxiety floods back and considered phoning somebody because I irrationally think if I'm on the phone when they walk past me, they won't bother me, but despite the fact that I've stood frozen for ages, nobody comes out from under the bridge. I wait, staring at the bridge for a while in complete confusion because there's no way that they could have just vanished. I can see through to the other side of the bridge, so I knew they didn't turn around and walk away or anything, but they certainly hadn't walked through because no one passed me. After a few moments, I start to think I hallucinated them or something. I have no history of hallucinations, but I couldn't explain it any other way. So I started slowly walking towards the mouth of the bridge, and just as I'm about to step in, I see it. The shadow of one of the men cast across the wall. My blood literally ran cold as I realized what was going on. They were waiting for me at the other side of the bridge, but they must have hidden behind the abutment so I wouldn't see them. My mind went to a million different places, panicking about what they would do if I walked under that bridge. I was convinced they'd just follow me. If I stayed where I was and phoned for help, I was certain that they'd come out to see what was going on and I'd be trapped. I did the only thing I could think of. I quietly ran to the fence that separated the canal path from the drop to the main road and climbed it. It was only about thigh height, and on the other side there was a small space before the wall and drop itself. I waited for a couple of moments as the cars passed, but thankfully I live in a quiet area, so the road was soon empty. I managed to navigate myself so I could lower myself off the drop without A, making much noise, or B, hurting myself too much, and the moment my feet hit the ground, I raced to the side where the houses were and sped walked down that path as fast as I could without making noise, only glancing back when I was nearing the edge of the road. The men were still next to the bridge. I could see that they were looking through the bridge to see where I had gotten to. I felt sick and terrified, but I made it home. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know who they are or if they'll be there again tonight, but I do know I'm not going to be walking at night for a very long time. This happened to one of my best friends and I back in 2017, and I feel like it's worth sharing. My best friend Elise was dating this guy Mark in 2016. They broke up right as New Year's was approaching. I've known Elise for over a decade, but we didn't talk much while they were together. I ran into them once at a local coffee shop, hugged her, and was chatting away while Mark stared at me in disgust, as if Elise wasn't allowed to talk to her friends. At the time, I thought nothing of it, assuming he was just antisocial. I had no idea he would go on to ruin an entire year of my life. It's really fuzzy as to how Mark got in contact with me specifically. I believe Elise posted about her breakup and I offered my support publicly, so he targeted me. It began on New Year's Eve. He started messaging me on Instagram over and over again, threatening me, and I was having a get-together with my then-boyfriend two of my now ex-best friends and my now ex-best friend's boyfriend. I remember seeing my notification blowing up and ignoring it. Everyone else seemed more concerned than I was. I brushed it off until late the next day. I checked my phone and I had dozens of DMs from Mark, as well as a few public posts that he tagged Elise and I in, calling us every name in the book and claiming I was the reason they broke up. I answered his DMs asking why he was targeting me. This was the biggest mistake I'd ever made. After some angry messages from him, he blocked me and I thought it was over. I also had some missed calls from Elise, so I finally contacted her and asked what was going on. She frantically told me that Mark was a dangerous man and that he's been tormenting her since the day they became a couple. He would throw her around his apartment, leaving awful bruises that she sent me photos of. He would threaten to end his own life if she left him, and he even threw a hissy fit at a tattoo shop because they wouldn't tattoo Elise's first and middle name over his eyebrow. He got Crybaby instead. Fitting. Elise also informed me that Mark had went to jail before meeting her for domestic abuse. He stabbed his ex-girlfriend in the leg and was only behind bars for a month before his dad bailed him out. With this new information, I was terrified. Elise told me where he lived, and it was directly behind the coffee shop I had mentioned earlier. I frequented that building and that part of town in general, and that'll come into play later. I eventually calmed myself down and forgot about him, until he got my phone number. I still don't know how he got it, but I woke up to 30-plus messages from him one day and was horrified. His messages included threats to end his own life if I didn't help him and Elise get back together, threatening to kill me, cries for help, him blocking my number and then unblocking it just to start the cycle all over again. I, being very naive and not wanting to be held responsible if he actually did end his own life, did not block him. I asked him to leave me alone, and if he wanted a number to a hotline where he could get some help, and he pretended to calm down for a bit. I gave him the number after many messages from him saying how much he missed Elise but also wanted to kill her. I told her immediately and pushed her to go to the police. She didn't. He conditioned her to believe that she would get in trouble if she reported him. And this went on for months. I usually didn't respond, and when I did, he seemed to chill out for a bit. I'm skipping ahead to a particular night where Elise and I were hanging out at my house. We were chatting away when my phone started to light up. I ignored it and kept talking because I didn't want to be rude. Elise peeked at my phone and said, "It's Mark. Look." Sure enough, Mark was bombing my phones with threats to slit his own throat because he knew Elise was at my house, calling us both terrible names and claiming it would be our fault if he died that night. I didn't answer, but what came next is something that still haunts me to this day. He sent a video. Being curious, I clicked it, Elise watching over my shoulder. The video was of Mark's arm, a huge gash going down the middle. He was fake crying in the background saying, "You made me do this. I hate you both." He clenched his fist over and over again to make more blood gush out. Elise and I were so in shock that we watched the entire 50-second clip despite how disturbing it was. I immediately called our local police station. Elise gave them his address, and an officer came to my house to view the video and take down some notes. While we waited for the police to arrive, Mark posted the gruesome video to his Instagram and unblocked Elise and I just to tag us in it, claiming we told him to do it. Being a conventionally attractive guy with an e-boy aesthetic, the girls that swooned over him commented some pretty harsh things about us and kissed his butt like crazy. He was admitted to the hospital that night, and I wish they kept him. The harassment continued the second he got out. Time traveling a little more now to a few months later, Mark hadn't let up and Elise and I were still very close. We had a friend, Kayla, visiting from across the country. She also had a run-in online with Mark and hated him, but wasn't afraid of him. She was always carrying more than one weapon, some pepper spray, and she knew how to fight, so she suggested we go take a walk in the part of town that he lived in. She wanted to visit that coffee shop, see some of our small businesses, and then grab dinner at a pizzeria. Elise and I reluctantly agreed. We parked in front of the coffee shop, grabbed some drinks, and started walking down the road. Within about 5 minutes, Mark drove by on his motorcycle. Elise and Kayla were immersed in conversation as I trailed behind. I looked up and made eye contact with Mark. Elise and Kayla noticed him as he was speeding off. Kayla assured us that he wouldn't get anywhere near us with her around, so he kept walking. Mark began circling the block we were walking on with his bike. As we crossed the next block, he switched that block and circled it too. On the third block was the pizza place. The walls are all glass, all see-through of course. We went in and were seated in the corner right next to the glass. We sat there for about an hour and a half, eating, talking, and sipping on soda. Mark circled the restaurant the entire time, and we did our best to ignore him. Once we were finished and got up to leave, Mark sped off and we didn't see him again that evening. Some time passed and Mark began riding by Elise's house every night. Within a week, he started doing the same to me. I told my parents and my stepfather, who kept a close eye on our street. My mom always made sure our doors and windows were locked, shades were shut before going to bed. My dad would even do a nightly patrol where he would drive around my street for a few minutes on his way home from work, since he no longer lived there. He would call me and let me know that the coast was clear as he was leaving. I still woke up almost every night to the sound of his motorcycle engine revving outside my house. We had no proof of this to show to the police because he was somehow doing this without a trace, so we didn't bother reporting it. At the end of 2017, Mark took his motorcycle and sped off to California to avoid the legal trouble he'd gotten into here. Elise and I were relieved, to say the least. He still harassed us from time to time, but he never came back. We stopped hearing from him after a while, and we thought nothing of it. Fast forward one last time to September of 2019. Elise and I were out and about, enjoying the sunshine, when she got a phone call. Mark was dead. He had died right after his calls and messages to us stopped. He got into it with his new drug dealer in Arizona and made them angry enough for them to shoot him, and he died instantly. He also caught 2 more domestic violence charges in California and Arizona and was on the run from his warrant. His father told everyone it was an accidental overdose because Mark was known for abusing Xanax and other miscellaneous drugs, but it was to cover his sociopathic son's butt. I'm not sure if Mark's death was his karma or some higher being protecting us, and of all the girls he's hurt before and would hurt in the future, but he's gone now. We never have to worry about our safety because of him ever again. Although seeing photos of him does still give me the creeps, and I feel terrible that he had to come to such an unfortunate demise. This occurred in 2017. Due to a multitude of factors, including a recent death of a close friend, I was unbearably depressed at this time in my life. For that reason, my family flew across the country to visit me in LA, where I live. We thought it would be nice to visit Catalina Island. When we arrived, it became apparent to us that it was the off-season. It was late November. The weather was cold, and as a result, the island was nearly empty besides locals and a few straggling tourists such as ourselves. Our first priority was to ditch our luggage so we could explore the island, so we immediately checked into our motel, though that word hardly does the place justice. I call it a motel because all the doors to the rooms exited to the outside, but in actuality our room was one of 20 to 30 quaint guest-house-looking buildings arranged in a sort of horseshoe shape around a walkway with rooms on either side of the path. The entrance to the motel was essentially one of the points of the horseshoe, and if you walked dead straight, you'd reach the room we were given, essentially on the corner before you have to go right to go further into the horseshoe. So from our room, one path led back to the street, the other further into the secluded maze of rooms. Stay with me. After a day of exploring and having just finished dinner, it was time for the cold, dark walk back to the room. Catalina Island is a decent distance from the mainland, and let me just say, it gets dark. Similarly dark was my headspace after the dinner conversation took a left-hand turn and my overwhelming depression got the best of me. I pulled my black hoodie tighter over my freezing ears and walked ahead of my parents to the hotel room, telling them I just needed to go to sleep. And I did immediately. Depression sometimes makes that easy. I was already losing consciousness as they entered after me, drifting off without so much as a good night. I then woke up to my mom saying my name, a harsh whisper. The room had 2 beds, my parents' bed closer to the door and mine further in the room. My mom's voice cut through the silence again, and she sounded concerned for me. I didn't blame her, considering my mental state at the time. Groggy, I rolled over. "What?" I asked. As my eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight coming in through the curtains, I saw her turn to face me. She was surprised to see me in bed. Her eyes got wide. If I'm in my bed, who was she talking to? We both looked back to where she was previously looking to see a hooded figure in all black standing over their bed. Now, I know this is Let's Not Meet, and you are reading this knowing a creepy thing is going to happen. It is in the title, but understand how horrifically startling it is to be on an island in the middle of the ocean and wake up to see a hooded stranger looming over you. This moment seemed to last forever. Life isn't like movies where characters unleash a blood-curdling scream. Sometimes the only thing that comes out is something panicked and guttural. My mom's words became low and severe as she said my dad's name in a dire voice I've never heard her use before. Then the hooded figure did something so bizarre and unsettling. It didn't advance towards us, but instead crouched in the corner near where it stood. The way it crouched was absolutely unexpected, even in regards to this already unexpected situation that it terrified me. It seemed animalistic. I knew 2 things. The hooded figure had been standing over us sleeping, and is not acting in any sort of way that I can understand. As opposed to the infinite moment of this figure standing over us mere seconds ago, the series of events that unfolded when my hulking ex-military dad woke up happened in an instant. Suddenly we were out the door, not knowing which way the intruder went. My mom was screaming, "Get him! Get him!" My dad was running down one path of the horseshoe further into the hotel, shouting through sheer adrenaline, "I'm going to kill you!" I ran down the other path towards the street. When I got there, not a sign of the intruder, but it became suspiciously quiet behind me. I ran back to the room to find my dad quietly walking back, his head low. He gets really close to me and I hear him say, "It's a freaking kid." And the explanation was, some young teen, tall and lanky as I'm in my 20s, wearing all black including a black hoodie, went into the wrong room, our room, the one time my parents just so happened to forget to lock the door. My mom woke up when he entered and seeing a tall person in a black hoodie, thought he was me, assumedly leaving the room in a depressive episode. And when the hooded figure crouched, that was him realizing his mistake and panicking. He was scared of us. As I got back to the room, my mom walked out and hugged this kid, who was now crying his eyes out. I would be too if a massive ex-soldier was sprinting after me with murder in his eyes. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and remember, if you mess with the honk, you get bonked.